She was 6 years old when her father decided he was going to sell the family around the world. So by the time she reached 7 years old, she was out on the sea with her father, mother and brother on a trip which her father had told her would last around 3 years or so. But the trip that she was on with her father, mother and brother lasted 10 years. Here we are back for another episode of Too Good to Be True Crime. Richard Taylor Woods here, coming to you from the rolling hills of Oxfordshire. And of course, as always, the wonderful, handsome and beautiful Austin Turner in Manhattan, New York. Austin, hello mate, how are you? What's going on? You're saying goodbye to your 20s, aren't you?
Yes, death to the 20s. I'm killing my 20s off tonight. That's right.
How'd you feel?
Oh, I feel great. I feel great.
What have you learnt in your 20s that you're going to take forward into your 30s?
Oh God,
or what haven't you learned?
I've learned how to become a podcast host. That's what I've learned.
Ah, yes. Yeah, that's the best thing that happened to you in your 20s, is it?
Yes, that's right. What's going on with you, Richard?
Mate, do you know what? I was talking about Too Good to Be True Crimes. This is one thing. I'm sure you have the same thing in the US. So at the moment, it is, you know, a quote unquote, an energy crisis, etc., where all the energy prices are just so expensive. Is that the same in the US at the moment?
I don't think it's quite as bad as it is in England. I mean, I know everything's expensive and fuel is expensive.
Yeah, and the prices just keep going up and up and up and up. And I was watching, it was on BBC Breakfast, and there was the CEO of, I want to say it was of British Gas, but he was either the CEO of British Gas or one of those big corporations. And he came on there and he said, I'm happy to answer any question. I'll try and help, you know, people understand. And they were asking him obviously about the standing charges and the kilowatt per, you know, whatever you're using. And he divulged, literally he wasn't asked, he just divulged his salary for a year. Okay. What do you think it was?
5 million.
5 million. Mate, not far off. His salary a year, £4.5 million. So you're looking at $6 million there, $6 million a year. And he's sitting there and he's talking about how the company's profits were something like 3 billion in 2020, at the early part of 2023. But then he caveated that by saying, yes, but in previous years, we may have only made 0.1% profit. And sometimes, you know, you have a big profit some years. And I was thinking, isn't it a crime that he is earning that kind of money when there are so many people in this country that can't even afford to heat one room, can't even afford to turn the cooker on? And he's earning £4.5 million per year. And I think even the interviewer looked at him and said, that is absolutely grotesque. And he said, yes, I know it is. He said, I know. He said, there's absolutely no justification for my salary, right? And the presenter said, did you just say there's no justification for your salary? And he said, yeah. He said, but I don't set my salary. It's done by, you know, Ofgem or the regulators or whatever. And I guess what he's saying is that, well, I'm not gonna, they're gonna offer to pay me this money, I'm not gonna turn around and say, no, I don't want that amount. There's absolutely no point to it whatsoever. Does that make any sense?
I hear the words of my friend and colleague saying, we invented money. We invented this thing. We came up with it.
Yes.
What's the problem here? Why can't we share? Why can't we afford to go to the moon because it costs this much? Why can't we afford to get everybody some heating in their house so that they don't have to keep the door open and let the heater from the hallway come in, you know?
Yeah, mate, you are talking my language, my friend. I say that regularly because currency doesn't genetically exist. We as humans have created wealth. He sat there and his body language was, he was kind of leaning back on the chair. It wasn't, I'm here to give information. I'd be, you know, sitting forward, you know, engaging and actually articulately trying to explain myself in a way which makes people think he's not a wanker.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what I did. He was sitting there, he had one of those handlebar moustaches that were twisted up like a ringmaster.
Oh, I would never do that.
Dude, yeah, like you've had one. And yet you're not unfortunately yet. Hopefully on this podcast you'll be making his salary one day.
Let's
But at
go.
the moment you've just got the stash, mate.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Without the money, without the
foundation.
money, the stash is not,
Well, I tell you, mate, well, I'd rather be you than be him. Let's get on with the pod proper, all right, mate?
What do you got for us?
So, today's story, I think you're going to enjoy this one, mate. I've done a bit of research on this one, and it's a very, very interesting story. And what it's called Wave Walker. Okay, Wave Walker. So Suzanne Heywood, she didn't tell this story for decades until she was ready. When she was kind of deep into adulthood and she felt safe enough to tell her story. She's actually written a memoir about her childhood, and it's entitled Wave Walker, a memoir of breaking free. That's published by HarperCollins. I've not read the memoir, but I've done a bit of research about it. So when she approached her parents about this story, she was always told that her story is one of privilege. That's what her parents told her, but she does not concur with that analysis. So Suzanne Heywood, she was 6 years old when her father decided he was going to sell the family around the world. So by the time she reached 7 years old, she was out on the sea with her father, mother and brother on a trip which her father had told her would last around 3 years or so. So she was told she'd be back from her voyage by the age of 10. And her father wanted to recreate Captain Cook's third voyage, but the trip that she was on with her father, mother and brother lasted 10 years.
Oh.
And she was 17. Yeah, mate, she was 17 years old before she ever returned to the UK. Can you believe that? Your dad's saying, right, we're going to go on a trip. You're thinking, oh, maybe it's just a 2-week holiday. No, it's going to last 3 years. Actually lasted the best part of a decade. Can you believe it? Poor old Suzanne, because she said that she left behind her best friend Sarah, her dollhouse, and her beloved spaniel dog, Rusty. Poor old Rusty. I probably think with Rusty, I mean, I'm sure that her best friend Sarah obviously was living with her family and she would have been okay. You know, her dollhouse is an inanimate object, isn't going to give a shit that she's gone on a voyage. But poor old Rusty the dog, he could be sitting in the house going, where the fuck has everyone gone? Like, do you reckon they just had one of those kind of dog feeders where it kind of automatically like produces the food like every 3 hours? And
They had the little pet camera and they were just like talking to the pet on their phone on Zoom. Yeah.
He's all right. Well, to be honest, it doesn't, from the research that I did, it doesn't actually tell me when this story took place.
Okay, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, as we get further into the story, we will see that it is probably just pre computers, pre-iPhones.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm pretty sure Rusty they probably stuck a picture of themselves as a family on Rusty's cage and just left him to it. So her dad basically said, we're going to go on this trip. Now, at this point, considering her dad wanted to recreate Captain Cook's third voyage and he was going to take his family around the world, do we think her dad is insane or just adventurous? Or both? What do you think?
I'm going to take a guess, since this thing went on for so long, that he was like a horrible, horrible sailor, horrible captain. He's just insane. Underexperienced. That's my prediction.
Right, well, we will see. So Suzanne was trapped on this boat named the Wave Walker, or just Wave Walker. So she didn't go to school, she didn't make any friends, and she was expected to cook and clean below deck for hours. Her brother was allowed to help on deck. Seems very Famous Five to me. Boys, you go and have an adventure, and girls, get the dinner on. It's not very like modern world, is it? So that's what happened. So her brother was able to kind of, you know, mix in upstairs, and she was left to cook, clean, tidy up, all that kind of stuff downstairs, I'm presuming with the mother. And then she said the Wave Walker ran out of fresh food regularly, sometimes even ran out of water on longer sailings. And when that happened, they relied on canned and dried food, and her father allowed them 1 cup of water a day for drinking and washing. Now, I don't know whether that is like, yeah, you can wash with this and then you got to put it back into the cup and then drink it, because if you're using 1 cup a day for drinking and washing, I'm presuming there's not a lot left. So I don't know if that was 1 cup for washing, 1 cup for drinking, who knows. But essentially they were rationed, and in what would have been deemed the modern world, that's not enough. So they did sail to beautiful destinations like Vanuatu and Fiji. And as I mentioned before, her parents' viewpoint were the kids were living a very privileged life, seeing all these places. I mean, so privileged they weren't even learning to read or write, apparently. So thanks, Dad, for that one. So her father attempted to cross the southern Indian Ocean at one point, and there were a couple of novice crew members on this boat. It was a fairly sizable vessel, probably not the size of a cruise ship, but a decent size to live on and have a couple of crew members. So they had these crew members plus the family, and apparently her mum didn't even like sailing. So the dad was like, "No, we're going." It sounds like a bit of a patriarchy to me, to be honest. The dad's
Nobody
in
really
control and
wanted to
everyone
go.
else just better.
Yeah, the dad just like planned this trip.
Yeah, and kind of like masquerading as this is going to be enlightening for us all. We're going to all really love it. But the mother wasn't a strong enough personality to say no. This is not right. So during this trip across the Southern Ocean, the wave walker hit a huge wave, and Suzanne fractured her skull, broke her nose in the accident, and the boat found its way to an atoll in the middle of the ocean. Now, atoll is like a small island or a coral reef with a lagoon in the middle. Okay. You see it on maps and stuff. It's just a tiny little peninsula of land in the middle of the ocean. And on that atoll, Suzanne had multiple head operations, but with no anaesthetic whatsoever. They didn't have proper medical care. They were like, I wonder if this point, if the dad thought they were still living a privileged life when, like, I don't know, her daughter's like having head operations with like coconuts or something, like on this atoll. So when Suzanne was a teenager, she never had any private space. She had to share one toilet. And by this point, there were about 8 or 9 adult crew members, and she had to share a cabin with these adults, like sharing toilets, sharing cabins. She had to sleep in the same cabins as these adult crew. So again, I'm presuming the boat is quite big, because I'm presuming after they go into different countries, they're then picking up different people to come and work, on the boat. So she said that as time went on, she realised that her parents had absolutely no intention of returning when they said they would. And Suzanne had absolutely no way of leaving this boat. She had no money, she had no passport, and she had absolutely nowhere to go. She never saw her relatives again. So didn't see grandma, granddad, cousins.
And she's not been going to school, so like
Nope.
She's not going to school. She's not educated. She can't just like go leave and get a job and that kind of thing. Oh.
That's exactly right, mate. Exactly right. Yeah. The only adults that she saw, apart from her parents, were the other crew members. And she said she saw a lot of customs and immigration officials when the boat would land in different countries, but none of these officials were kind of interested in these 2 young children. And you think they'd be like, who are these guys? Like, because I've seen sometimes when you go through immigration, certain families get pulled aside, and the immigration officials, they say, don't they, to the kids, who is this?
Yep.
And see what the kid says, because then the kid, kids, for the most part, they're living. Their reality is, well, that's someone that took me from my mum, or that, Anyway, they weren't interested, and it was never ever flagged up that these 2 children were sort of being taken around the world, and perhaps didn't want to be. So for her parents, apparently it was a freedom. But for her, Suzanne, it was a prison.
Yeah.
Now, it took 6 years to convince her parents that she wanted a proper education. 6 years of saying, I want to be educated, I want to learn to read, I want to learn to write. So when she was 13 years old, they reluctantly agreed to enroll her in an Australian correspondence school. Now, as I understand it, a correspondence school is probably like an early form of remote working. So you get sent work, you have to do the work, send it off, it gets graded, marked, and then gets sent back to you. But for her, living on a boat, this was incredibly difficult, because you've obviously got no postal address. But she continued with it because it was the only way. She wanted to escape, and felt that the only way of her doing that was through education.
Damn.
But her parents were always pushing her to work on the boat rather than spend time studying, because sailing is expensive. A friend of mine owns a boat, and he says, "What does boat stand for, Rich?" And I said, "I don't know, you tell me." He said, "It stands for bung on another 1,000." Yeah, and also I will say this: when I said, "What does boat stand for?" and I said, "Bung on another 1,000," I kind of expected a bit more of a laughter track coming in there, Austin, which it didn't happen. So, I'm just thanks for that, mate. I appreciate it. Right, so there was nowhere for Suzanne to study. So often she would hide in the front of the boat under the sail because no one would look for her there. Her father wouldn't even give her paper sometimes because finding paper in the South Pacific was really difficult. So she'd send off her lesson work, and when they ported, what she would do, she would post her work off, and then what she'd do, she'd write on that work where her next place of port was. So when she landed, she would give, I don't know if they were landing in somewhere in Southeast Asia, she'd find where the nearest post office was, give that address to the people she was posting her papers to, and they would send it back to that post office. Yeah. But sometimes her father would change course, and so they wouldn't land where she said she was going to be, so her work would just disappear and it would never get seen again. It was very hard for her, but she knew it was her only way out, so she just persevered. Hey, get this. Her father once said to her that her education was less important as she'd never have to support a family. I mean, he sounds a delight, doesn't he, the father? I mean, what a delightful man he sounds.
And as far as we know, this is just like an average family from the UK?
Yeah, just a family that had a harebrained idea to take the family around the world and did. I don't think these days, I mean, if you take your kid out of school for an afternoon, you get fined. These days, I know what's like in the USA.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking is that we've talked about like the lack of laws and oversight at sea. And so I bet if they're at sea, they can get away with not educating their kids and much more.
It's the law of the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. So when she was 16, her parents enrolled her brother into a school in New Zealand, but she was still correspondence studying, right? So her parents, they landed in New Zealand, they left her and her brother in New Zealand, enrolled him in a school, and just sailed away. So she now had to look after her 15-year-old brother, as well as cook, clean, while he went off to school, and she was still correspondence studying. And they lived there for 9 months in a hut beside a lake. The only adult that they knew lived hours away. Her father left her some money in a bank account, but she had to forge his signature every time she wanted to obtain this money. I mean, man alive, you can't even imagine it, can you? So as she got older, she wrote off to many universities, but they wouldn't even consider her to be a student. So the local universities wouldn't consider her because she was an English citizen, and the English universities wouldn't consider her because they couldn't assess her qualifications. They couldn't see her education. They couldn't see how intelligent she was. Now, eventually, mate, Oxford University replied to her. Big up Oxford, my homeland. And she sent them 2 essays. And from those essays, Oxford University agreed to interview her. Now, this was big news. So if you think after so many rejections, a huge university, arguably one of the most famous universities in the world, gave her an opportunity to interview her. Now, the only thing is about this is that she had no way of getting there, and she had no money to get there. So what she did was she picked Kiwis in New Zealand, and she used some of her father's money to buy a one-way ticket. So she literally banked everything on this trip. She saved the money from picking Kiwis, used some of her father's money, and thought, right, this is it, I have to do this. And you know what? It worked. Oxford University offered her a place, and by the following year, she was there studying.
Wow.
And I have to say, at this point though, this all happened, and her relationship with her parents was really strained. They didn't want her to do this.
Yeah.
They wanted her to come back on the boat, live this life of exploring. But she struggled for the first year at Oxford University. She did struggle. Obviously, facing the same struggles as most students, no money, living on cold baked beans, pasta, all that kind of stuff. But more than anything, what she struggled with, she hadn't developed her social skills like properly as a kid.
Yeah.
So having spent so long at sea, and she wasn't interacting with many other humans, so her social skills were so poor. I mean, her excuse is that she didn't interact with other humans, so her social skills were severely stunted. Austin, what's your excuse?
Oh, fuck!
After she did start to make friends, and she improved in her second year, and she had access to like all the libraries and the laboratories in the university. Mate, I can imagine that's probably like Disneyland for her, wasn't it? Like all of a sudden, like she had a thirst for education. Then all of a sudden she's got access to, every genre of book and laboratory that she could ever wish for.
No, I mean, it's a huge sign from the universe, right? Because it's like she just dreamed of going to school and getting educated, and then pretty much like if you could picture the greatest university in the world, like Oxford, visually, architecturally, the education there, the facilities, like it must be, like you said, fucking Disneyland, like absolute dream come true.
Yeah, like, it's her tenacity was second to none. Then she went on to do a PhD at Cambridge University.
Fuck yeah, girl.
So mate, that's two of the biggest universities in the UK. She was accepted. She worked hard, and like you said, is that the universe conspiring to say, this is for you, and what is for you won't pass you by. And then
the
she
same
joined
grit as Josephine Baker, isn't it? She had grit, and she just was going after what she wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Then she joined the UK government. So at this point, my estimations of her have gone down a little bit, to be fair, after joining the UK government. I mean, mate, she's obviously super intelligent. Imagine what a waste that would have been if she'd never had the opportunity to study. Like obviously she's, she can contribute, and would never have been given the chance to do that.
Yeah.
So she eventually ended up working in the Treasury, and she met her husband, Jeremy at this point. She had 3 kids. She raised a family, and she decided she was not going to raise her children in the same way.
They didn't want to go sail around the world?
No, she wasn't going to do that, mate. Absolutely. She made sure that her kids always knew that she was there for them, and she made them feel that her love for them was unconditional. No word on her brother, though, to be honest. It didn't say in the research. So she obviously just left him in New Zealand. Is he just sitting by the lake still, wearing a loincloth, thinking, where the hell is anyone going to come back for me? Yeah, we don't know what happened to her brother, but I'm presuming he was, he obviously went to school in New Zealand, so I'm hoping that he did all right. Now, she said by writing her memoir, Wave Walker, that it would probably end what remaining relationship she had with her parents, but she always knew she had to write it. And the thing is about her parents is that when they eventually returned back to the UK, whenever she tried to discuss like the past of them, they just said it all worked out in the end. I mean, luckily for them, to be honest, it all worked out well in the end, because they could have had a serious issue on their hands with their daughter having all kinds of mental health issues, social
and they're
skill
sitting
issues.
there like, well, if we hadn't taken you around the world, you would have never gotten into Oxford University. It's like, no, she got in despite the fact that you took her around the world.
Yeah, against all adversity. But she said she always knew she was going to write her memoir, Wave Walker.
Wow.
And she and I quote her when I say this. She said, "My childhood was certainly unusual, but it was never privileged." And that is the story of of Suzanne Heywood there, which is an incredible story, and against all adversity ended up doing very well for herself. But hey, just going back, I just want to ask you, so going back to her parents, I mean, the charge sheet for crimes committed there, mate, what have we got? We got, abandonment, neglect, child abuse.
We haven't got enough
denial.
time on this podcast to go through all the charges for them.
No, we haven't. And it sort of going back to what you were saying about it sort of just the law of the sea, like international waters. Technically, if she died on that boat, what country is responsible for bringing charges, if any?
Nothing would. I bet you nothing would ever happen if she had died on that boat. Legally, no one would have been held culpable.
No, because you're probably right. Because on the cruise ships that we quite often go on, you know, they're registered to certain countries, and so like if we're on a certain cruise ship, it might be under US law. So if you commit a crime, you're tried, you know, with the US judicial system. But like you said, probably out there it would have been, and probably her parents, they seem to be like the kind of people going, oh well, that was meant to be, we'll just leave her here and we'll carry on, you know, around the southern tip of India or somewhere like that, you know. Do you think that her parents should have faced some sort of criminal charges?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I guess it's
the main
like
one
after
being...
she's gone to Oxford, she's gotten a doctorate, like it's probably really hard to go back and try and, you know, hold them accountable for anything. But gosh, if that was a teenager today and she had a cell phone and she was sharing what was going on social media, like, yeah, her parents would be screwed.
Documenting it, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, mate, is they're in massive denial about it, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it all worked out in the end. That was their only excuse. It's bizarre, isn't it? How can you do that? I mean, how can you be that deluded that you think that this... I mean, I know kids get homeschooled. I'm on the fence with homeschooling. Most people that I've met that are homeschooled are, dare I say it,
unique,
a little odd to say the least. That's just my lived experience. But you know, I'm sure you know there are many homeschoolers that do very well for themselves. But again, it's the social interaction, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if you just spend all your time with your mother or your father and you're not mixing with other kids, you know, it's gonna stunt your development. Again, I have no basis of analysis, only my own lived experience, but I think that it could have been massively problematic for her, and she obviously had to learn how to interact when she was in her late teens, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, I guess it's still formative years at that point.
Yeah. But I think that there's a lot of people out there that are stuck in situations, and they're shitty situations, but they say, oh, well, but I'm privileged because I have both of my parents. I live with them. I live with my brother. We all, you know, we work together. We have a boat and we have a crew. We get to see the world.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, there's two sides to every coin. And even though her parents might have tried to convince her that, oh, you should be grateful for all this, you know, she saw something more for herself. So it's honestly a really inspiring story. I did not know about that. I'd never heard about her.
I mean, interesting read, that memoir. So if you know, I encourage anyone to read that. As I said, it's called Wave Walker, a memoir of breaking free, published by HarperCollins. And that was a story of Suzanne Heywood.
I'll go get that book as soon as I'm finished with my picture book that I've been working on.
Yeah, you're nice. Is it your? What was it? A graphic novel? Is it?
No. It's more like a picture book. You know, it's about the ugly duckling.
Just stripping it back, going back to your youth.
Back to the basics. Yes.
Yeah, nice, mate. So, mate, that was the story. I hope you enjoyed that one. And and we've referenced a couple of other pods, haven't we, that we've done in this particular episode. So we encourage the listeners to go back and listen. If you haven't already, to some previous pods. Keep supporting us, keep liking, subscribing, reviewing, and all that other stuff that we always ask you to do. This is Too Good to Be True Crime. I'm Rich, he's Austin. I'll see you next time, buddy.
Adios. See you soon, pal.